Le damos la bienvenida a nuestro invitado especial, Ethan Zuckerman.
Invitado especial, Ethan Zuckerman. Ethan Zuckerman es el director del Centro para Medios Cívicos de MIT y es profesor asociado de práctica en el Media Lab de MIT, en donde dirige la investigación sobre Media Cloud, un sistema de análisis cuantitativo de la fijación de agendas en los medios digitales, y Promise Tracker, una plataforma que le permite a los ciudadanos monitorear a instituciones poderosas usando tecnologías móviles y de red. Es el autor de Rewire, Digital Cosmopolitans in the Age of Connection, Reconfigurar, Cosmopolitas Digitales en la Era de la Conexión, editado por W. Norton en junio de 2013. Fundó la comunidad internacional de blogueros Global Voices, un portal de noticias y opinión para medios ciudadanos en más de 150 países y en 30 idiomas. La investigación de Ethan se centra en temas de libertad de Internet, participación cívica con herramientas digitales y conexiones internacionales a través de los medios. Bloguea en ethanzuckerman.com/blog y vive en las montañas Berkshire en Massachusetts Occidental.
Señor Miguel Cortés, presidente del Grupo Bolívar, señores miembros del jurado, señor ministro David Luna, señores ganadores del Premio de Periodismo Simón Bolívar, señoras y señores, buenas noches y perdóname, pero mi español es muy malo. Ustedes van a entender mejor si hablo en inglés con la traducción. So, lo siento y disculpe. I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about a deep change that I think is occurring in the world that we all share. And since I'm a professor at MIT, you probably think I'm going to come to you and talk about something like quantum encryption or biomedical engineering and the rise of synthetic biology, but the good news is I don't understand any of that either. So I'm coming to you as a journalist and as a publisher, and what I want to talk about is the social and political shift that I'm seeing from my lab and in my work as a reporter. And it's a shift that I think might help explain what's happening in recent events, not only in Colombia and in the United States, but also in the UK with the Brexit vote, and at this very strange moment that's happening globally in politics. So this shift is changing what it means to be a journalist and what we as an industry need to do. So I was in Bogota last in August, before the referendum. And talking to friends and colleagues, I was feeling great hope that we were going to see the end, the formal end, to more than 52 years of civil war, and that the amazing transformation we've seen in the last couple of decades of cities like Bogota and Medellin was suddenly what Colombia was going to be known for globally, rather than this really difficult and horrible legacy. But talking to people, I also get this sense for just how hard it was going to be to achieve peace, and that to get to a solution that felt fair to Colombians, it was going to take a lot more than an agreement and a referendum. So now, in the wake of the plebiscito, Colombia looks very much like a nation divided, with 49.8% voting sí, with 50.2% voting no. It looks like we're divided between those who were for and who were against the peace agreement. And I want to suggest that actually something different is going on. I think Colombia is actually split between the 62% who didn't vote and the 38% who did. The group that won in the referendum wasn't Uribe supporters. It wasn't those who wanted to see more punishment for former FARC leaders. Those who won the vote were 62% who had so little faith in the democratic process that they didn't end up participating. Now, it's really fashionable to beat up on people who didn't vote. We can argue that they were too lazy, we can argue that they weren't educated enough about the issues, we could say that it was raining and they didn't want to go out and get wet. But I want to suggest that it's very dangerous to dismiss this group as lazy or unmotivated or not educated. So let me give you an example from my own country, the United States. In our elections, like the ones we have coming up, we see a disparity in voting every time between older people, particularly retired people, who vote in very great numbers, and young people who tend to vote a whole lot less. And people look at these statistics and they say, oh no, it's a crisis in civics. The next generation doesn't care. Young people are so selfish. They're so obsessed with their mobile phones and their music and their media, they aren't paying any attention to the world around them. But the facts don't really bear that out. Young people in America are volunteering at an unprecedented rate, an incredibly high rate. They're active online, they're active in political discussions. They talk about issues like racism and sexual harassment. They write online. They share stories about what's going on in their own life and how it might affect politics. In other words, it's not that they're disconnected from politics or civics, it's that they're doing it very, very differently. My students aren't, for the most part, interested in going into politics or into government service, but they're starting businesses that have the twin goals of making money and making social change. Maybe they're building products around alternative energy or around organic farming. They might not be voting, but they're incredibly active in their civic and social life. So what's going on here? It's not a crisis in civics. It's a crisis in confidence, specifically a crisis in confidence in institutions. There's a survey that's been taken in the United States every year since 1957. It's the Gallup Research Survey, and it asks Americans, do you have a great deal of confidence that the government in Washington will do the right thing all or most of the time? This number peaked in 1964, with 71% of people saying they had faith in the government to do the right thing. It started falling in the 1970s. It's fallen steadily ever since. That number now is about 15%, 1-5. So the vast majority of Americans, and I count myself as part of them, do not have faith in our government to do the right thing all or most of the time. And who can blame us? Our Congress passes fewer laws than ever before. There's less compromise between our two parties. It's so difficult to accomplish anything that our government periodically shuts down, and we periodically threaten to default on our debt, not because we're out of money, but because we literally can't agree to sign the check. So here's the thing. Americans aren't just losing confidence in government. We're losing confidence in any large institution. If you ask this same question of Americans about big business, you ask them about healthcare and hospitals, you ask them about universities, you ask them about, God forbid, the media, they will tell you they have very, very little confidence in those institutions. Now, you may look at this and say, well, you Americans are crazy. We know that's true because we've been watching your presidential campaign. But let me tell you, this isn't just the United States. There's a research firm called Eurobarometer, and they've been asking these same questions about confidence in institutions. They've been asking them in Europe and in Asia and in South America, and it turns out there's only two groups of countries where confidence in institutions is high. It's in Scandinavia, and the Scandinavians are a little special, and it's in autocracies. It's in China. It's in Singapore, it's in the United Arab Emirates, it's in these societies that are very far from being open. What's going on is that there's a real crisis of confidence in institutions in most democracies around the world. So what happens when you hit this point of very high mistrust? People just stop participating. They don't participate in the political process. If you don't trust that the government can or will carry out what you want them to do, why would you bother voting? And to a certain extent, why would you bother protesting? Because when we protest, what you're basically saying is, hey, government, I want you to listen to me, and I want you to do a better job than you're doing. These elections continue, but the people who are elected understand that they don't have a very strong mandate. They know that the majority may not support anything they do. The people who continue to participate tend to be the ones who are the very most passionate, which tends to mean that they're also the most extreme. And so the danger is that we end up in paralysis, where these extreme parties can't come to compromise, and they end up more and more disenchanted from voters. Their worry that government couldn't accomplish anything ends up becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. So when we lose confidence in institutions, we tend to give our trust to individuals. In the US, that's leading to this incredibly strange election, where we have a man who has a chance of becoming president who doesn't seem to actually believe in democracy. But he is able to stand up and say, look, I'm outside of this system, I am outside of all of these institutions that you don't trust anymore, and therefore I am the only one who can fix it. But I'm here to give some good news, which is that I don't think mistrust has to lead us to demagoguery. I don't think it has to lead to the death of democracy. What I do think it's starting to do is lead to different ways that people participate in civic life. So all around the world, I'm seeing citizens looking for ways to make change outside of the political process. My students don't want to go to government, but they do want to go into business. I had a former student come into my lab the other day. He's moved to India. He's invented a new solution that pulls pollution out of motorbikes or cars or generators and turns it into ink. And so he handed me a marker, the sort of graffiti marker that people use to write on walls, but all the ink is made out of Indian auto pollution. Now, that's a way of approaching social change. It's a weird way of approaching social change, but it's a way of approaching social change that isn't about using law. It's about using markets. It's about trying to do right and do well at the same time, and they may be right that this is a way to actually make change. Maybe the most powerful way I'm seeing young people try to make change is by trying to shape social norms, those unwritten rules of how we interact with each other in society. And the way that young people often do this is they make media and they put it out in the world. So you may have heard, in the United States, we have some very serious problems with racism. And in fact, one of the ways that racism is ugliest is that black people are disproportionately likely to be killed in encounters with police. And we've had a movement called Black Lives Matter that is trying to call attention to this. Now, Black Lives Matter isn't trying to pass a law. It's been illegal for a long time for the police to kill civilians when they're unarmed. But this is a problem of social norms. What happens is, as Americans, we are socially programmed to see people with dark skin as threatening. And so people misreact. They pull out the gun too early. And we have to find a way to challenge that social norm. What we've seen with the Black Lives Matter movement is that these people writing on Twitter, writing on Facebook, have reprogrammed journalism. My lab did a study, and we found that about 6 months after the Black Lives Matter movement started, if a black person was killed by the police, they tended to get 10 times as many stories in the media after Black Lives Matter than they would have beforehand. And they tend to get 100 times as many shares on Facebook after than they would have beforehand. This campaign, which may just look like people putting forward hashtags, turns out to be a very powerful way of saying, I want to change how society thinks about this issue. I want to make sure that this becomes a priority that we work on in our politics and that we work on every day. This form of social change is pretty uncomfortable for us as journalists. For one thing, The press is an institution that's subject to almost as much mistrust as government. And now activists are telling us that we're not doing our job right. We're not covering the right things. We need to cover this story and not that one. They're telling us that we're not always living up to our own ethical standards, and that sometimes our reporting is making complicated situations even worse than they were beforehand and even more confusing. I want to invite you to look at this situation in a different way. Activists have realized that making media is a way of making change. What they've realized is that what we do as journalists is incredibly powerful, and that they can do this work too. We have a natural tendency to defend our territory. We want to make sure that we're the professionals who keep getting to do the important work that we do, particularly as we struggle with this financially. But I think the way forward is to cooperate with the sort of people that I work with, these people who are making media to make change. I think that activists and citizens can make news that's ethical, that's fair, and that's trustworthy, and that we can learn lessons from them as we learn to work together. My friend Michael Schudson, who teaches at Columbia Journalism School, he has an essay called 6 or 7 Things News Can Do for Democracy. Some of what he asked the press to do is really familiar to us: to inform, to investigate, to analyze the events that take place. Anyone can do these things. You don't necessarily have to be a journalist to do it, but there's something that journalists know how to do well and ethically and fairly, and we can help citizens learn to do this work better. But Schudson asked the news to do some things that we're not always comfortable with. He argues that the news, part of the job of the news, is to make us empathize with people who we don't know and might not understand, to really make us understand what's in their hearts and what their struggles are like. He argues that the news's job is to create a public space where we can have discussion of these issues of the day. Sometimes the job of news is to help us mobilize, to get together as citizens and to try to make change. Some of these are places where we can learn these lessons from activists, from citizen journalists, from people who are using the media to make change, and to feel powerful even when they feel deeply disempowered by the political process. Schudson ends this essay by suggesting that news can help people understand and appreciate our democratic system and how it works. And here I want to exchange that our job isn't to explain how we think democracy is supposed to work or how democracy used to work. Our job is to help people understand how democracy works and doesn't work now. Often people are right to be mistrustful of these institutions. Our job is to discover and reveal institutions that are broken or are corrupt, but we can't stop there, or we leave our readers informed but disempowered. We have to help citizens, we have to help our readers understand how they personally can make change in the world, at the ballot box, as consumers, as entrepreneurs, as scientists, as creators, through social media, through technology. We have to document where the levers of power are in society today and help people learn how to move them. Maybe this is an unfair challenge to put on the media. Everyone knows the media is an institution that's going through its own difficult set of changes, and it struggles to be financially sustainable. But I believe that the answer to our future as an industry begins with ensuring that journalists are relevant as civic actors. The brilliance and the bravery of journalists in Colombia that we're honoring today and who've done groundbreaking work throughout the past years gives me great confidence that you are all up to the task. So thank you for listening to me, and thank you, and especially thank you to the journalists for the important work that you do.